I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messengers God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today, my guests are immediately on my right, Mona Malin, who is a transition support specialist. Welcome.
Thank you.
And our good friend Don Handrick, who is the resident teacher at the Tibetan Buddhist Center here in Santa Fe. Welcome back.
Thank you.
You're getting close to being right up there as to my most frequent guest. I just want you to know that, which is really nice. Okay, today's prophetic topic is the most important of all voyages. And our topic can be found in the book, The Wisdom of the Desert, written by Thomas Merton, who is an American Catholic writer, a Trappist monk, and a mystic. And the complete statement reads as follows. What can we gain by sailing to the moon if we are not able to cross the abyss that separates us from ourselves? This is the most important of all voyages of discovery, and without it, all the rest are not only useless, but disastrous. So we're going to talk about what he's referring to. And I just want to throw in a little plug here that not only are we talking about Thomas Merton's quote, but there is a wonderful book that's been a major part of what we're going to talk about here, which is called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And that book is written by Sogyal Rinpoche, and it is really the basis of what we're going to be talking about today. So we gave away part of the show. So why don't we start, Mona? Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Thank you. Well, one of the things that I do is I am a doula, and that comes from a Greek word, which I think actually literally means slave, but in our use of it in this culture, it's woman attending another woman, and it means in birth and right after birth. So I'm a birth doula and a postpartum doula. I also work with the other transition of death. I volunteer for hospice. And the way that this came about, well, the way that I started working with birth was after my own 3 births. They were life-changing, transformative. Suddenly I knew why I was here, and I could see a road in front of me that I had never seen prior. I'd been on lots of roads, but this one had a different feel to it. And I had the opportunity to birth my own child, my son. The midwife was there, but she gave me that. And when she gave me that, I realized that that was something. That was something for me. And I knew it was a gift. So I became open to working with people during birth. I thought I wanted to be a midwife. And I decided to become a childbirth assistant first and see what my relationship to birth was there. And right after I started the training, I went to the funeral of the person who is my mentor in this world. And at his funeral, there was a woman who was facilitating this home funeral. And I watched her, and I talked with her, and I said to her, "You're a doula, just of passing." And she said, "Yes, I am." And suddenly it hit me that that the two transitions, the transition in and the one out, are not so very dissimilar. And I found myself just aware that I could do both. And then I set out really just with the awareness. I didn't carve it out and say, okay, I'm going to do this. But once I became clear about it, then opportunities came to me and came to me and came to me and came to me. And So I deal with birth and I deal with passing, but also I deal with a lot of transitions in between. So parents, people who are becoming parents, that's a huge transition. They find me and want to talk about that. And when they're breaking up lots of times or things like that. So I noticed that I must resonate with transitions. And since I'm a student of myself, I have been through a lot of transitions and I've studied them well, so I can understand why maybe I'm a candidate. So,
like the two most important things, the desire to do it and the resonation with it. Yes. Don.
Thanks, Reverend Phil. Yeah, in line with the topic of today's discussion, I wanted to share a little bit more of my spiritual path that perhaps I haven't shared on this show before, because I actually came to Tibetan Buddhism out of the whole issue of confronting death and dying, living in San Francisco in the HIV epidemic in the 80s. I became very involved around looking at issues around death and dying, was doing a lot of hospice work, other work around people with AIDS in particular, and then my own partner died of AIDS in 1992, which happened to be the same time that Sogyal Rinpoche's book appeared on the shelves. And so I picked that book up and started reading it. Actually went on retreat with him in 1993, and that's when my Buddhist path began, really was being introduced to the whole subject of Tibetan Buddhist teachings around death and dying. So from there, I went on, after a few years of working with his organization, I eventually found the FPMT, Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition, which is a mouthful. We're an international organization, over 150 different centers and projects around the world, founded by Lama Thupten Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who is our current spiritual director. And our center itself, Thupten Norbaling, is located over on 2nd Street, 1807 2nd Street, in the 2nd Street Studio Complex, just across from Backroad Pizza. And I've been a teacher there since end of 2005. I began teaching and became the resident teacher there in 2006.
That's about the time you and I hooked up and started doing radio together. Yes.
Yeah, the radio show.
Yes. So we're going to be talking about transitions, and during this discussion you're going to hear the word Bardo, B-A-R-D-O, and it's a Tibetan word, and there's a number of translations that come attached to it, so to speak. One of them is basically intermediate state. It also can be translated as a transitional state or an in-between state. So would I be accurate, Don? You know, a lot of people associate the word Bardo with just death, but it's really any transition.
It depends. And each tradition kind of has a way of looking at it. And so there's sometimes, I think, 4 Bardos set out. I even saw another presentation with 6 Bardos, because we can just talk about these as various states or transitional states.
Yes.
You know, states of mind, the state of birth, the state of death, the state of life, of, you know, the natural Bardo of life. And then even within life, all the various little kind of segments that you could divide up as some form of a transition in regard to our consciousness, our awareness.
Or just our physical growth. I mean, so many of the religious practices have these transitionatory celebrations at certain points, you know, that early on in childhood you become an adult. Or so. I missed that one myself, but you had not a quotation, but there was an interview with Margaret Mead that when we had talked earlier, you really were kind of attached to, and we couldn't find it. Maybe you can give the viewing audience a little bit of a gist of it.
Well, I was at the Museum of Natural History in New York, and I entered the part of the gallery where Pacific Island was, because I'm very interested in that. And just as you were walking in, there was an interview between somebody who wanted to mentor with Margaret Mead and she herself. And she said to him, as if she were interviewing him to see if he were a proper candidate, well, the very first thing that you need to know, the very first thing you need to do is to be well grounded in your own cultural beliefs. That before you can ever go out and study another culture, you have to have that yourself. And then she said, and have you ever been to a birth? And he said, no. She said, of course you haven't. Because this society protects you from that. She said, but you can't really know a culture unless you've seen a birth. Mm-hmm. And she said, and have you ever been to a death? And he said, no. And she said, well, I suggest you do. Because until you have seen those two events in a culture, you can't fully understand that culture. And I stood there, you know, every hair on my body standing up on him because I understood what she meant. I understood how, for example, with me, with birth, I had to really decide what my beliefs were and clarify my beliefs about birth so that I could put them aside. In other words, if I had an agenda, because maybe my births didn't go the way that I wanted them to, or maybe they did and I thought that I was really something because my births went the way that I thought they ought to go. Either way, I'm holding an agenda. And as long as I'm holding an agenda, I cannot be open to fully understanding another culture.
We need to meet them where they are.
Have to meet them where they are. And
Yes.
you have to really let go of any thought that there's a right or wrong, a better or worse, and I've worked a lot on that. Because initially I did have some beliefs of this is the right way to have a baby, this is the wrong way to have a baby, this is that one would be better than, but over the years I have relinquished it all, knowing that it's perfect. The way ever that happens is perfect for that being, for that mom, and so anyway, I understood what she was saying to him, and
yeah, I like that concept. So we're going to, before we get into the meat of this program, we have some terms I think we need to define so we're all on the same ground and the viewers are on the same ground with us. The first term is spirit. I'm sure these things are going to come up, but I'm going to use them. So for me, and then just pop in anywhere you feel, two terms that are related, spirit and soul. To me, spirit is the overall divine presence within everything, the universe. Soul is the individual Don, Mona, Phil that carries in this particular life the karma and carries it through life after life after life. Are we all okay with that?
Yeah, I think
feel free to.
in Buddhism, we just don't tend to use these words. Again, the word that we would use that encompasses both of those to some degree is the idea of consciousness.
Okay.
So, or mind and consciousness or awareness are all kind of put in the same category. And what we're really talking about is that sort of cognitive experience that we have that is just the pure knowing. That's non-material. It's an absolute part of all of our experiences throughout all of these various states or transitions or what have you. From life to life, and that's where the thread or the continuum is within the sequences of lives that occur, is always having consciousness giving rise to another moment of consciousness, another moment, so that when we get to the end of this life and it looks like consciousness is no longer with the body, then there is still a continuity of consciousness that is going on. And we'll talk about that, I imagine, today a little bit about the Buddhist view, of Tibetan Buddhist view in particular, of what happens at the time of death in regard to consciousness and then where it goes from there. But the idea is that contains, as you were saying, it's the container or receptacle of all those karmic imprints, of all the things that shape and meld the experiences that we have in this life and beyond this life, that are all arising from the mental movements that we have that make those imprints, the process of karma.
Let's define karma.
Karma is a tough one to really get your head around because we talk about it in terms of the law of cause and effect, but technically karma means cause. Karma means the actions, the intended actions that we engage in that actually produce that energy, if you will, that brings forth experiences. So there is a variety of ways that karma can ripen in terms of the results that we experience, but the Buddha says that there is nothing beyond our experience that isn't caused by our karma. That there is everything that we experience in terms of the type of birth that we get, the types of habits and patterns that we have within our life, the types of physical things that we encounter in terms of our environment, and even the experiences we have within a particular life, such as having good health or bad health, what have you. These are all shaped by our prior actions. So karma is that kind of force, if you will, that fills in the experiences that we have with the variety of things that are shaped by our own actions.
Is there a distinction in Tibetan Buddhism between a life-to-life karma and an ongoing day-to-day karma?
Well, you'd see a variety of causes. They're all karma, but you might have more kind of immediate karma that could occur within a particular life versus more long-term karma, or bigger event karma. For example, the karma to get a human life, like we all have, is something that produces the duration of that entire existence, however long that karma kind of had the potential to create that life. So that's why, again, humans will have a varying degree of life expectancy or life term, simply because the karma that they come into this life with is already dictating to some degree the duration of that life. So there are karmas that have larger impacts or karmas that have smaller impacts, but they're all in that bucket of
Everything
karma.
is karma.
Yeah.
Everything is, yeah. Nothing happens out of sequence, so to speak.
Out of sequence or out of chance.
Yeah.
There's nothing random. You know, everything is arising from its own respective causes and conditions, some of which we can obviously control. I mean, when you learn about karma and learn to utilize it, it's a great empowering tool because it produces the responsibility then to make sure that everything we do with our minds produces the best result for both ourselves and others.
And that is the clarity, too, because I like that phrase, we do with our minds. It's not only necessarily our actions, it's what's
Absolutely.
behind those actions.
Primarily even our minds.
Yes. So I could do something that looks good out to the community, but if it's driving my ego and like, I'm the best, that's creating a whole different karma than the
Absolutely.
people. Like if I want to build a hospital and put my name on it, yeah, that would then look at me, you know?
Yeah.
But
And
the
you'll
people
still
might get
produce
the benefit.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't get the benefit because now I'm so attached
Exactly.
to this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's one of these stories from the life of the Buddha where a king put on this huge feast and there was a beggar outside who was just simply rejoicing in the merit of the king doing this for the Buddha and his followers. And he, at the end of the whole feast, the Buddha was asked, well, who got the most merit or positive potential, greatest karma out of this? He said the beggar who was rejoicing on the side,
Yeah.
not the king who put on the huge banquet.
Exactly. That's so important. I mean, another show we got to deal with, get back and talk about ego. So what we're leading up to now is transitions. And you started talking about transitions, Mona. Let's define a transition.
Well, it's a change from one state of being, I suppose, to another, from non-physical to physical to non-physical to physical. But within that, as you described about the Bardos, there's transitions in between that. So there's, infancy, and then when you're able to be mobile, you're a toddler. That's a huge transition. And people call it the terrible twos or terrible things because they don't understand the significance for a child when they get some legs and can move around. There's a whole world that opens up to them, and they're curious and want to investigate. But because it's kind of inconvenient, it gets labeled something. Again, and I've watched this with my teenagers. I've watched society's response to teens when they come into a aspect of themselves where they have a voice and they have their intellect is intact. They can reason in a new way. They can see things. People have a hard time with teenagers because that transition challenges them. It's very beautiful if you watch it. They're coming into themselves. They're questioning. Yeah, they're picking up on our inconsistencies and stuff, but it's very beautiful. So there's all these transitions. When a woman becomes a mother, that's a huge transition. Getting married, becoming a couple. So all these transitions are the day-to-day ones that I deal with, as well as simply the coming in, which is a big one, and the going out.
So is it fair to use terms such as major and minor transitions?
Could be. I mean, it depends on how you're looking at it. If you're looking at it from the ego perspective, then you might see, you know how on a ruler there's a bold mark for the 1 and the 2,
Yeah.
and then in between there's little marks, and then when you get to the halfway from 1 inch to 2 inch, the 5 is a little bolder. That's kind of how I picture it. For the person going through it, every single one of them is major, but yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. How is that dealt with, if at all, in Tibetan Buddhism?
Well, in the context of, when one has sort of some cognizance of the transitions that are going on in one's own life, then, and tries to learn from those experiences, as opposed to going through and creating a reinforcement of the habitual patterns that keep you stuck in those sorts of experiences without being able to grow from them, without being able to develop from them, then that's the kind of the goal of our Buddhist practice, is to use whatever we're experiencing. It's a 24/7 sort of thing, to always be looking at our own minds, our own hearts. How are we developing our qualities in the face of whatever we're experiencing, be it a major life event that you could call a major transition, or the minor transitions we go through every day, the small deaths or small births, whatever might be happening throughout our lives.
Okay, I got a question I'm going to throw out to both of you. We just made a statement that everything is karma. And you agree with that?
Well, I had a question.
Go ahead.
I have heard someone be told that they came into this life with no karma. Now, I know what they meant to say by that, because I think, not thinking about the Tibetan Buddhist perspective, I probably in my own mind thought of karma as unfinished business. Some thread that you came in that was incomplete for you, and you attracted a bunch of circumstances and situations to grow from it. And so when this person was told that they didn't come in with any karma, as I was listening to you, I was thinking probably you would say that that's not possible. I don't know. I wanted to throw it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the traditional view of it would say that we all are carrying a whole lot of karma from life to life, because every single moment of our minds we're creating some subtle imprint, be it stronger when we have really strong afflictive emotions, for example, minds of anger or jealousy, pride, what have you, or even really strong virtuous minds. When we're feeling our heart really open and practicing generosity, kindness, what have you. So all of these things are creating karma. Karma is not a negative word. Karma is just simply a principle of,
it's a law.
of
it's a
how
divine
things
law.
work. And we could even say that a fully enlightened being, a being who has removed all of the kind of the karma that's together with the conditioning of existence, they still would have that principle operative. It's just they've purified all of their karma so that they continue to experience a purer view of what the world is and the beings in it and what have you.
That would fall under the category of a bodhisattva.
Bodhisattva, even to the level of a Buddha, I mean, as a bodhisattva, you would already be on the track of purifying your mind and removing all of that. But karma is still an instrument through which we create the results that we want, or the results that we don't want, in the case when we're doing it with the ignorance of karma, of cause and effect.
Edgar Casey once said that karma is created any time we choose self-will over God's will. And so if I didn't have a lesson to learn, I couldn't see why, less coming back to teach, why somebody would come back and say there was no karma. So,
well, I think typical of our mainstream society, we pick up on the negative aspect of everything, and then we limit it to that. So I think the piece about possibly karmic retribution, that we use it on each other, it's like, well, that's your karma.
Right.
So we're trying to apply a principle that we don't understand in an expanded way. It's common of what we do. So you hear it now said, well, if somebody maybe did something to somebody else or took something, or I don't know, they say, well, it's your karma.
Exactly.
But it's a limited understanding and use of it.
That's why I like the cause and effect as opposed to punishment and reward.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I got a question for both of you, because what you had just said, I came into this life, and I am sure that I didn't create it out of nowhere. It was my experience to be a drug addict. at some point, I stopped. But there are people that go on forever. So the question I'm throwing out is, can it not be our karma to come in some form as a teacher, even though the teaching is self-destructive to the teacher? Or in your case, to come in as a stillborn or a miscarriage because they have volunteered for that experience and they have volunteered to teach that lesson to the parents, the attendants. Thoughts, feelings?
Well, I think there's huge beauty to come in, have an intense experience, find your way out, and then show other people how to get out. How could you show them if you hadn't gone through it? So ultimately, I think that you came in as a teacher, but you can't teach something that you haven't known. Now, you can't explain to people, yeah, in another life, I'm sure I was a drug addict. No, it has to be in the present. If I were a drug addict, I wouldn't follow somebody out that hadn't done it themselves. You know what I mean? It would be lip service to me.
But some people stay in it for their whole lives to teach others how to maybe be compassionate, how to not be judgmental, how to be accepting. They die of their addictions. Now, I know we have free will that mixes in with karma. We're going way afield of this whole discussion, but why not?
Why not?
You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, there are people who actually, I believe, choose to come in and be dysfunctional, and they stay in that dysfunction their whole life in spite of opportunities. And I believe that that's their commitment to their karma and their commitment to others to teach that lesson. Learn how to deal with me, learn how to accept me, learn how to love me in spite of my own shortcomings. Or again, coming back to child that comes in and doesn't make it through the birth process. I don't believe that if we're talking, we're saying karma, everything's karma. I don't believe that's accidental. I believe it's intentional. They came in, they chose to have that experience for whatever their karmic reasons, and the parents are having that experience for their karmic reason as well. Does that resonate at all?
I think the one thing you might have to get clearer on is whether, when you say it's a choice, is whether there's really some true volition involved. Is there really a conscious choice being made? When we talk about the law of cause and effect and karma, what we say is that basically this is sort of the current, if you will, that's kind of causing you to flow down the river in a particular way, the river of life. And so your choices, in essence, were made when you created the karma. And as we are going through life, we are making choices that create the karma for our future experiences. So the idea is, yes, we do have volition or choice, but in terms of when we get to the end of this life, for example, and a karma, a seed of an action is ripening for us to go into our next existence, to propel us into that next existence, we have probably very limited control over exactly what that karma will be. We might have some control based on whether it's a peaceful transition and we have die with a mind that's virtuous, that's in a really wholesome state, a mind of love and compassion, for example. We might have an ability to shape that. But the idea that somebody would choose then to become a drug addict or someone who's going to cause a lot of challenges to the people around them and make a conscious choice to do that so others can be compassionate towards them is probably not. That's a bit of a stretch. There are many people who will develop compassion around someone who is in that state, but there are many people who won't. And so the idea is that that experience of being around someone who is in that state, who is working with that karma of being a drug addict or of having that particular experience, the other people around them will make some sort of conscious choice as to whether this is something to help them open their heart or whether this is something that actually hardens their heart.
So you don't think they're there making those choices by conscious decision?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that that's maybe, again, a little bit of a stretch. I'm curious what you think, Mona.
I feel the same. I don't believe that it's conscious that they come into that, but they've chosen in a way, or attracted, I guess maybe feels a little more accurate, attracted. Circumstances that put them in a position to follow a particular path. And the thing that I think about is that the necessity of duality, because we can't have conscious people unless we have people that are less you know what I mean? Everything is so relative. So these people serve a purpose maybe for others. I feel really happy that I've gotten to the point in my life that my instinct is not to judge someone for having picked a lower vibrational path or something. In the past, I would have. I remember in my 20s, I would have, had to make that discernment. But what I know and believe now is that everyone is important wherever they are, and we influence each other in ways that we're not conscious of. I do think it's important for us to develop compassion, to see everyone as a reflection of ourselves. So if I see someone who is an addict, I remember the part of me that had to move through the addictive stage of my life and came around to love that part of myself. So now when I see this person, I can love them. I think that is the ideal, and we're working on it as a society, but individually, I think we've made a lot of progress, and I can feel that. I can feel that there's more compassion, that there's less temptation to think of right or wrong path, good or bad path, lower or higher path. But all of those together, it's like the spectrum of the rainbow, like your headband. It's a beautiful thing to have all those in there and say, yes, together we are the human condition or experience.
We're putting together another show. As we sit here and talk.
Because I took you off topic.
No,
okay.
I mean, we all did this. No, but I mean, the idea, I think there needs to be a nice, interesting panel discussion about karma, reincarnation, and free will. But let's get back to transitions, because that's what we originally gathered here for. I told you this thing can go wherever it goes.
Beautiful.
Dying and death. In the context of the book, they call it the painful Bardo. That there is some attachment to the process that gives it a finality that makes it painful, besides the physical aspects of it. So what we've been talking about in talking about karma and choices is, how do we prepare for this?
So it's a big question, because when we call it something like a painful Bardo, it's putting a label on it again that isn't really inherently there. The death process, they say, for someone who's really prepared themselves spiritually, becomes something where there's absolutely no fear, and even these great masters get to a point where they actually anticipate their own death. They look forward to their own death. It's like this event finally arrives that they've been rehearsing for all their life. And so in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there's a number of techniques that are used, but one of them is just gaining greater familiarity with the process of death, of what happens. And these are teachings that go back to the Tibetan Book of the Dead and even the Guhyagarbha Tantra that the Buddha taught, that speak to a dissolution process that occurs, where basically that consciousness, which is sort of at the core of your being, goes through stages of letting go of the grosser forms of consciousness through all of our sense consciousnesses and eventually our mental consciousness that's gross in terms of conception, being able to kind of think through things, and it gets into a state of very subtle awareness. And this is actually after breathing has stopped. When clinically you'd be dead, this process is still going on in terms of subtler levels of consciousness. And then when you eventually get to what's called the clear light mind, which is a completely non-conceptual awareness, a practitioner who has already become familiar with this process and has a very strong meditative practice in their life can actually use that as a springboard for great spiritual realization because of the nature of that mind. That's sort of the core of our being, is this clear light mind that is completely free of all delusion, free of all of this kind of karma that conditions the rest of our experience. At those moments, particularly at the time of death, is a key portal, if you will, for spiritual growth.
How do we get to a place, how do you get to this, how do you guide people through a dying process if you haven't died? Because we just said we needed those experiences to guide others. Yeah. So having not in this life experienced my own death, well, maybe I did, but let's not go there. How do I guide somebody?
I extrapolate because as you were talking, even I was thinking about the way that I see it. Everything, it's like you move a little bit and then you make a circle. And then you move a little bit and you make a little circle. You move a little bit and you make it. So every transition that we go through has a similar sort of a pattern. I'll give you an example of one that I'm living with right now. We had an exchange student come from Norway. She's going to be here for 10 months, let's say. The first exactly 5 months that she was here, there was resistance, resistance to coming in, resistance to adapting, accepting, allowing herself to just kind of be here. Somehow when we hit the halfway mark, she relaxed some because now she's right in the middle. Before she was more here than, there was a long way until she went home, right? Once she got in the middle, her perspective totally changed. And she relaxed, she allowed us to come into her, she came into our family, and now it feels really good, and of course it's moving quickly. And now I expect right before she goes, there's going to be some resistance to leaving this and going back home. To me, it's the exact same way with life.
And death.
We hit our 50, we hit the middle point. What happens? We stop working so hard. We stop going upstream. We relax a little. We stop trying to be so perfectionistic. I mean, it's kind of classic midlife changing that we go through. And then it's a little more smooth sailing. And then right before we're about to go out, we're hit with the final resistance. So I just see the pattern of it.
And I hear that, but again, we're talking about living. You've had living experiences that you can relate to. How do we relate to somebody who's dying and give them the guidance and the comfort of an experience that we've really never experienced?
Except that I don't see it as a grand finality where they're going off the edge of a cliff.
Right.
And to say, I haven't jumped off the edge of a cliff, I don't know if you're going to break your legs or not. But I do believe and feel and subscribe to the perspective that it is endless. And so there's a transition, yes.
Okay. Do they buy that? What happens when they don't?
I don't know if they do.
Okay.
I think ultimately by dying, and I saw this with my father as well, I felt so proud of him when he died. I felt so proud of him for letting go of all the resistance of his fears and beliefs and just letting go. To me, it took courage. I think it takes courage to come in as well. And I do see some resistance with babies when they come in.
Okay.
So,
but let's stay with the dying.
Okay.
We got
So again, of course, from a Tibetan Buddhist point of view, or any of the philosophies or religions that believe that it is beginningless and endless in terms of our experience, we've died many, many, many times. We can't even count the number of times that we've died. Do we have recollection of the death process in this life? Not to my knowledge, but the awareness of that, again, is something that every tradition is going to have its own way of approaching it. In the Tibetan Buddhist point of view, these are the teachings that we work with, is to try to gain some awareness of what could potentially be happening. And if this is how it is, if this is what the experience is like, to use that as a template to prepare for makes a lot of sense. Whether it is or not really comes down to whether you believe the Buddha's teachings on the death process are how it happens or not. Now, even if you were to die a very quick death, they say that all of this, if you were to die in a really horrible accident and it all go quite quickly, you still would go through those stages. They would just be much, much shorter. When someone's dying a very gradual death, these things can actually be delineated often by external signs that are occurring in terms of watching someone go through the death process. And then internal signs, there would be various things that appear to the mind's eye of that person experiencing it that would be indicators that those various stages are occurring.
My understanding, and maybe it's not accurate, is that part of this guidance process is not only the guidance through the living part of dying, but the actual transition over. Like you go out the door, you make a right, you go 3 blocks. You know what I'm saying? I mean, where does that come from?
Well, again, the Tibetan Book of the Dead does speak in that way of kind of like at this point you're going to be experiencing these various appearances of either kind of wrathful beings or very benevolent, kind beings or what have you. A lot of this, again, is karmically shaped. I don't want to think that it's so rigid that everyone's going through the exact same kind of maze to get to the next rebirth, if you will, but rather that there will be common indicators in terms of, in general, what occurs as the consciousness goes through these stages. And then an individual karma would dictate what happens after that. You know, that person, in terms of how long they might stay with the body. In Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we generally tell people to leave the body undisturbed for up to 3 days, with the idea that the consciousness could still reside in a very subtle state within that period of time. Then after those 72 hours, hopefully the consciousness has parted, but it will very shortly after if it hasn't. Some great meditators, they say, are able to stay with that state, that clear light mind, with the body for weeks even. So then you go from there into the Bardo, and what they technically call the Bardo, the intermediate state, which is your segue, your in-between state, another transition of going from what you're leaving behind, this life, and going into your future existence. And the extent to which you can guide someone through that, I mean, again, maybe some of these great masters have the ability to play some role. Myself, someone sitting by the bedside of someone who's died, may not be able to really do a whole lot to affect that person's experience. It becomes quite karmically conditioned at that point.
What do you do when somebody's getting towards that transition? How do you, what do you guide them? How do you guide them?
I feel that just by my belief that this is natural and beautiful and known, just believing that, not even what I say, but just the energy I hold, relaxes them and soothes them at that moment.
Do you talk to them? Do you hold their hand? How does
Well,
it vary with each one?
when you know that something is right and perfect and this is the time and I'm not holding any fear around it, then I can do things that would soothe them. But mostly I think it's an energetic thing. There are signs, you know, with hospice you start to learn, oh yeah, they start to do this at this point, they start to do that at that point, they start to talk to entities that aren't there. And you just sort of nod like, oh yeah, you're right on schedule, you know, this is exactly, just like I would at a birth, you know, oh yes, this is what you're going through, I understand that. So I think it's really holding the knowing. I think I told you this story before, but I tried to talk to a woman about it. She said to me, she said, I'm dying soon. And I said, yes, you are. And I said, are you scared? Or I tried to begin a conversation about it. She said, I don't want to talk about it. And, you know, I went, oh, okay. So I realized, you know, if they talk about it, you just let them talk. That I was trying to initiate a discussion. It was not my place to. She just wanted to say that. She just wanted to tell me. And I said, yes, I do. I know that. You know.
I mean, they often say that you die the way that you lived.
Yeah.
To some degree, this is true. I mean, again, so another part of preparation for death is really to live your life well. And there was an interesting thing I saw on the internet about these list of 5 things that people regret when they approach their death or something. But looking at it from a positive point of view, I mean, what are the things that you feel really, you feel complete? You feel that your life has been meaningful and purposeful, that you feel that you can die with that peace of mind that knows that that transition is something you're completely open to, because the time has come for that to occur, and the time that you spent in the Bardo of life, you know, and all the various things that you did there have been meaningful, have been something that you will take with you. And that's, again, the karmic component of it, is that you carry that future energy with you.
So basically, in its simplest form, life is the preparation for death.
Death, the preparation for life.
For the next life, yeah.
I mean, at some level, I mean, because of the cyclical nature of it, we can say that obviously we spend more time, most of us, in a life state than we do in the dying state, but that doesn't diminish kind of the interrelationship of them, and the fact that, yes, I think we can spend a good part of this life really feeling like our life is complete, so that we can die with a peaceful mind.
So if I, for lack of a better term, if I believe in the oneness and the continuity of what we talked about earlier, defining spirit. Spirit is ongoing, it's eternal. And I'm eternal. I'm part of that spirit, that I carry that karma. That the practices I do, the beliefs I hold, make it easier for me to die because I realize I'm just going to come back and do this again. Or do something different
Or
again.
those people who die with a sense of an afterlife, but it being more final in nature, going on to a heaven,
If they
some
believe,
sort of experience that they feel is, it can be having some belief, I think, in some form of an afterlife, something that comes after this existence is probably a very helpful tool for many people dying. Not that it's essential, but I think it can provide,
Accountability.
Yeah.
So if I see myself as being brutal and toxic, then I'm going to fear my death. I'm going to have trouble with it.
Very possibly. Again, it would depend upon the individual, and a lot of times there can be a lot that occurs as people approach death, and we don't. They use that old phrase of what can't remember it now. Converts. Like that everything kind of becomes much more crucial when you're approaching death, and so you kind of turn your mind towards religion in a bigger way or what have you. Those things might seem kind of superficial, but I think people actually could go through some pretty major transitions at that time in terms of approaching death. It comes to mind that film Dead Man Walking, that was really very powerful, albeit pieced together based on various life stories, film of what can actually happen when somebody comes to a place of forgiveness for themselves, for others, for whatever's occurred in this life, and dies with a peaceful mind. So although the life could be quite tumultuous, it's not to say that the death would necessarily be the same.
The next Bardo is, the next transition in the book is called After Death. So and they call it the Luminous Bardo. Before we get into that, we've got about 10 or so minutes left. I know both of you had some announcements to make. You want to go first?
Well, I experienced a really powerful grief ritual with a woman named Sabamfu Somai. I've actually known her for about 15 years. And the work that she's doing lately is she's being called to do this particular ritual around grief. It's a communal grief ritual that's done in Burkina Faso, and she has brought it here because it's timely and relevant, and we don't have a way of releasing really day-to-day griefs. I mean, the only grief we're really allowed kind of is when someone passes, and then all our other grief kind of hops on that and comes out. But this idea of a catharsis that's regular and routine to release these day-to-day griefs that we have, whether it's our dreams, whether it's a part of ourself that you have to let go to move on, whether it's a relationship, a home, a child, whatever they are, if we don't release them, they build up and they start to interrupt our ability to express passion and love and to move in a, they block us, is what they do. So she's coming. On Thursday night, she's doing an event on birth, pregnancy and birth.
We can't mention prices, but there'll be fees for these things, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yep. So Thursday night will be at Unity Church. It's April 25th, and it's on African perspectives on pregnancy and birth. And then Friday evening at the Rail Yard, also 7 o'clock, is on grief. It's sort of the opening lecture on grief, and then Saturday and Sunday will be the ritual. And I know you'll give my contact information. I can be contacted to register for more information.
That's flashing on the screen. They'll
Okay.
flash again, and if you don't catch it, my information rolls at the end, and contact me, and I'll be happy to put you in contact with Mona.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you have something.
And yeah, just a brief announcement that the last time I was here last month, we had a little panel on forgiveness, and it really inspired me to work with this topic of forgiveness in a Buddhist context. And so the 2 Sundays in April, the last 2 Sundays, the 21st and 28th, at our center from 10 to noon, both of those mornings will have 2 sessions on exploring forgiveness and the elements of forgiveness and what it means to really forgive. both ourselves and others. So again, that's by donation. There's no set charge for that. Everyone is welcome, no matter what your financial situation.
Okay, and again, same comment. If you've missed the contact info, and we'll roll it again before the show's over, just contact me and I'll put you in touch with Don. So let's go into this after death stage, and we're not going to get to much more beyond
Well, maybe we
this.
can, there's really not, there's a lot of detail, but at the same time, it's really just a transition again, where the consciousness is driven by that karma to seek another rebirth. And they say that every 7 days, it goes through a mini death if it hasn't found that next existence. And so then it basically at some point will link up, if it does have that good, fortunate karma to be able to be reborn as a human or to take human rebirth, then it would link up with a fertilized ovum in the womb of the mother, and this would lead right into, the stages of development in the womb and into birth.
So the third Bardo is the rebirth Bardo, and again the book referred to it as the karmic Bardo of becoming. Do you ever get a sense when you're in that process that there's something, what's the word I'm looking for? Is there ever indications from the child coming in that they're carrying something with them? Like, what am I doing here? I wasn't here just a minute ago.
Yeah. Some babies come in very easily. There's no resistance. They come in, they're well, you can feel it. The energy they give off is just pleased, and there's some that take a long time to really acclimate. And they'll be sort of slow and sleepy for a little while, and then suddenly you'll go, oh, there they are. And then there's some that are fighting it. I always want, I don't know, but I wonder if they're ambivalent, or if they're wondering if this was a good idea, or if it's just very rough on them to have gone from being, a spirit entity to having a body. Even with my own daughter, I felt like when she was not comfortable in a tiny body, that maybe her spirit was too big and she was crammed in this little body. That's how she looked to me, and it took her several months to. So I do see that. I do see the range of response to coming into a physical tiny baby body.
Is there anything in the teachings that talk about this?
No, I mean, again, we would say certainly that each being, is coming in with a particular karmic imprint that's going to lead to whatever it's going to face in that existence. And so it makes perfect sense to see these kinds of various ways that could, from the outside looking in, assess what's going on in terms of the comfort or discomfort there is with that particular life or with the situation. So yeah, I don't know that it's anything more specific than that, and just kind of the general teachings on karma and how that's shaping that.
Do you ever have, I don't know, how do I want to, sense that not even the struggle, but they're here, but they're not here, that their presence, their consciousness is somewhere else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some of them are right there when they come in. You can feel it. It's palpable. And other times it's not. It's just not there yet.
And have you had any experiences down the road where somebody's talked about, they're making well, they can't make comments, they don't talk.
To go back to, to think back on their birth?
Yeah.
Some people actually do have more memory than you would think on that time. And I have heard people remember the setting, for example. I had a childbirth class recently, and somebody was saying, I don't know if this is possible, but I actually do remember leaving the hospital. I remember the light coming out of the hospital and being hit by the light. And I believe them.
There used to be this, I don't even know if it's still popular, or maybe it was never popular, maybe it was just faddish. A long time ago, the rebirthing. Is that still around? We still doing those kind of things?
If it is, it's not really called that, but I think when people are coming to prepare for their own birth, there's a certain amount of work that they have to do. I don't think we have to go as deep as we used to, like into hypnotherapy. I think we can access it more easily because there's more people that can handle it.
It's interesting because they were, I mean, it wasn't even hypnotherapy. It was like putting people in this tub of hot water and trying to recreate and get you back to your consciousness in that time and start you over again, you know, which was...
Yeah, I did a bit of it in the Bay Area, actually, with some teachers that were well versed in it. I can't say I had any experiences that went back to my birth, but it was an interesting experience nonetheless. Because I think anything that is, whether it be meditation or other techniques of kind of going deeper into who we are, what our consciousness is, those sorts of explorations, the inner world are really important, you know, to do.
But I'm not going to go there.
Another session, another...
No, that's just a story that doesn't need to be told.
Oh, okay.
So let's go into the fourth one. It's life. They call that the natural Bardo. So now that's both a reflection of where we come from, and it's a setting the tone for where we're heading. And like you talked at the beginning, it's just full of transitions that we have to experience, navigate, and that create for us our next journey. How do we stay in life and prepare for the next journey?
Well, you know, I told you that the word doula literally means, you know, but I wish it had more application. I wish you could extrapolate it to have someone walk with you who's been on that segment that they feel like they know well to assist others. Like, I wish we could all be doulas for each other, helping through each of the various transitions. Maybe,
Well, I mean, that's a function of the teacher, the master, the guru, whatever title, the lama. I mean, you know, ultimately, yeah. Somebody has to teach us how to do life. And I think that's the problem in society today is we're not getting instructions how to do life, much less learn how to die. So we are dysfunctional as we are.
But what if we just need someone to walk with us who understands the path, who is just sharing their compassion with us? We don't need a therapist. We don't need a professional. Maybe we won't encounter a master. We just need a normal person.
Well, and we certainly don't need someone to kind of take all of the mystery out of it either, because at some level this is the path that we're on and we do have to experience it. But it is helpful to have those guides who've come before us to at least point out, you know, what we need to pay attention to, perhaps, what things we might want to reassess and look at so that we make better choices as we go through that process.
We've got about 2 minutes left. You got a parting thought?
Well, along the same line, just someone to understand and to have their own cultural beliefs so intact that they can let us live ours out, to be loving and accepting of what we're going through at that moment and not need us to do it differently. That to me would be what I can imagine each person needing at each transition point, at each point of demarcation. Just someone to understand and not need it to be different.
To hold the space.
Yeah, to hold the space.
Yeah, I think it's very important.
You got a parting thought?
Not in particular. I think this was really good. I appreciate certainly everything that Mona shared, because it gives another dimension to what I look at in terms of my spiritual practice. So it's been very helpful.
I thank you both. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thank you.
Same here.
I want to thank you all for tuning in. You are part of this process. If you have any questions, you could reach me. You could reach my guests. Be happy to converse with you. Be happy to help you in any shape, form that we can. So know that life is an ongoing journey. Life, death, keeps happening. And make the most of it. Until the next time, blessings to you all. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.